Running encounters makes up such a big part of playing and running TTRPGs, and I think it can really make or break the overall quality of a game if it's done wrong. In some systems, combat runs with a structured system to maintain balance. In D&D 5th edition, it's called challenge rating. And whilst the CR system is not the worst thing that has ever been made, when it comes to balancing encounters, it gets a lot more difficult at higher levels, especially when magical items and things of the sort are added into the mix. So let's discuss encounter balance further and see how deep this rabbit hole goes. As always, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to support me in my growth. I just want to say a special thank you to all of my subscribers, everybody who's been supporting me over the last couple of years. We recently hit 5,000 subscribers on the channel, which I never really thought was possible. So it's been a huge motivator for me to continue to push this channel forward. I'm going to try and be even more active with videos, try and see if I can get back to 2 videos a week for you guys. So thank you very much, and please help me grow by liking these videos, watching them, sharing them, subscribing to the channel. It all really helps. Thanks. I think the big debate we have with encounter balance is realism versus enjoyability. There is so much importance in our games with our players actually having fun. If we constantly throw underwhelming or overwhelming encounters at our players, they'll grow bored with our games and they might not want to play anymore. I do think that realism, or the better word would be verisimilitude, is important, and I think I go beyond what most DMs do in order to try and achieve this in my games, but I don't think that every encounter needs to be perfectly balanced. But for the sake of fun, some balance is necessary. And that's why I use dice formulas to determine the number of enemies present in a encounter scenario. And I use a lot of random encounters. The big thing is, if everything's random, then nothing is random, right? And if I'm using dice formulas and having encounters that I'm not always or very rarely pre-designing, then it is just a part of the world, right? It's just a part of the game. But let's say that it's 2d6 skeletons. That means it could be 2 skeletons or as many as 12 in total. Sure, with 2d6 you're likely to get middle of the range, somewhere between 6 and 8 skeletons. But there have been a few times where I've rolled low, or a few times where I've maxed the formula and my players have had to adapt accordingly. Based on the number of skeletons present, I can present a scenario to my players, and this is where improv comes into play. Perhaps it's just a few skeletons on patrol if it's 2 or 3, or a host of skeletons who are marching to war, or maybe they're returning to the stronghold of the necromancer who animated them, right? My point is that I do something called soft balancing, okay, which is a set of parameters that I consider when balancing or running encounters and scenarios. I leave most of my stuff up to chance to really determine how dangerous things are going to be, and rather than having a set balancing point, I create a range where some challenges could be deadly, whereas some challenges could be trivial. My aim is to create variety, as variety is the spice of life. But I do want my challenges to be realistic. If bandits are harassing the nearby roads of a local town, 1d6 bandits just doesn't really make a lot of sense if there are going to be like guard patrols and caravans that have got caravan guards and stuff like that. So 2d6 bandits makes more sense, even for a lower level group like levels 1, 2 or 3, right? I could roll 2 bandits from a 2d6, I could roll 12, right? And I think 12 bandits could easily defeat a group of 4 to 6 level 1 characters, absolutely no problem. I think the big thing that you want to do at your tables is create a healthier culture around encounter balance if you haven't already. Your players need to understand that not every scenario they encounter is going to be reasonable or fair. What will be fair is your adjudication of the encounter and the rulings that surround it. Okay, the players are going to have agency to dictate their strategy moving into that encounter. One thing I like to do, and I think is just standard procedure, is have the monsters roll stealth, have the players roll stealth, and then compare perceptions to see if the enemy is able to surprise them, if they're able to surprise the enemy, or if they just spot each other, which is what normally, happens. And, whilst a level of strategy is important for your players, it's important for your creatures and monsters to have strategy too. I have a simple chart to determine the reaction of monsters to my players, and I'll tell you that it creates some very interesting scenarios at your table for you to play out. I had a situation where the player characters came across a pack of bugbears who were neutral towards them, which was a bit of a surprise because all of the previous encounters they've had against bugbears have unfortunately been hostile. But these bugbears just wanted to pass without any problems. So they sent forward their linguist who spoke the language of the bugbears, and they basically were able to trade information for some treasure that the party had. They learned about a nearby ancient temple that had long since been abandoned, and this is something that they wouldn't have learned if it wasn't for this random encounter and the outcome of it, their roleplay with these bugbears. They wouldn't have found out about it. It was definitely what we would call, emergent play, and I know that is quite a buzzword by channels like mine, by people like me. But this level of sandbox and kind of player-led gameplay is really something to strive towards, I feel. Players really like to be in control. It makes them feel like they're playing Elder Scrolls with even less restrictions. And I ended up creating that ancient temple on the fly, using a randomly generated procedure of just rolling dice, and the players really enjoyed it. And I think that's the big thing, really, about it. Not every encounter needs to be combat. And if your players believe that action is necessary in every situation, then I believe that they've been taught wrong when it comes to being players. That's why it's okay to throw hordes of orcs towards your players, their characters, your player characters. They can run, they can hide, they can negotiate, or, worst case scenario, they'll get captured. If you just have their characters killed in a scenario like that, then I think that's boring. Okay, I don't think that really develops a good culture for your games. And the idea is we want to have these interesting stories. I mean, if they make multiple mistakes in a row, yeah, then they die. But if it's like one mistake, they get captured, they get brought back to the Orc stronghold. Maybe they get thrown into the fighting pits to fight for their freedom, or they get put to work in the mines, and now there's a new adventure, a new story about them trying to break out the mines and free the other people who've been captured too. And that just sounds like a really, really interesting story, right? The big thing I want to talk about next, and it kind of goes into what we've been talking before, is using morale for your creatures. I'm so tired of seeing games where the Dungeon Master has enemies throw themselves at the players until they are all dead or captured. It's so boring and it's so unrealistic. These creatures should have some level of self-preservation, but for some reason, because it's D&D and we're rolling dice at a table, the DM just seems to fucking forget that, And I understand that usually the reason for this is because if they don't throw the monsters fully at the players, then the encounter won't be challenging because you're using a CR system and you're trying to keep it within this threshold that you've set for yourself. And I get that, but you need to stop looking at fights as needing to be perfectly balanced. It's just not necessary at all. Even using 2 orcs in a scenario against a group of mid-level players is a perfectly reasonable fight because they're they're going to be thinking differently about this. It's not a case of whether they're going to die or not, the players are going to die or not. It's whether either of these orcs is going to be able to escape after spotting the players and call reinforcements, or go back to the stronghold and say, yeah, there are players coming. It's about creating tension. And to be honest, there are very few instances where I would reasonably have 2 orcs, despite what their reaction roll is. If they're hostile, that doesn't mean that they want to fight. It means they probably want to run if they're outnumbered that much, right? That's the way I look at it. In a normal fight, I give every monster a morale rating, which usually ranges between 5 and 8. The higher their morale rating, or their score, whatever you want to call it, right, the less likely that they will break and flee or surrender, right? If 5-player characters are battling against 6 orcs, I would give every orc a morale score of 6. If they have a leader, maybe the leader will have 7. Okay, keep it simple. Whenever their morale is brought into question, perhaps the orc reaches half health, or half the orcs perish, I will roll a 2d6 for that orc, or all the orcs, depending on the situation. If I roll higher than their morale score, so, you know, we said 6, right? So if I roll a 7 or higher on the normal orcs, their morale breaks. Monsters can break morale from lots of different things, including what I've already said. There should be now a list on the screen for you guys to see the different ways that monsters can break their morale. I'm sure you guys can come up with additional ways that they could as well. And, you know, how this is represented is up to you. You know, perhaps they surrender and drop their weapons. They could defy the orders of their leader, who's telling them to fight on and kill the player characters, those pieces of shit. Or, you know, maybe they'll flee, right? I mean, it's really up to you to make that interpretation. I like to use various outcomes for a single battle. You know, if 2 orcs fail their checks, one of them might drop their weapons and surrender, the other one might run, right? So it's interesting to have that varying degrees of outcome. But, you know, obviously the last thing I can mention is that you can always adjust a scenario on the fly. You would do well to not change stats, including hit points or fudge dice. I've never been a fan of that. I genuinely do believe in the sanctity of Dungeon Master honor, and any argument that detracts that, I think, is you just pulling at straws. I don't think there's any... I think if you expect your players to not fudge dice, you shouldn't fudge dice. I get it, we're the adjudicators, we're the storytellers, but we expect our players to listen to us and our rulings, so we need to be fair, I guess, and we shouldn't be fudging it in their favour or really against them either. You know, you could have, if it's too easy of an encounter, you could have reinforcement monsters arrive, right? Or you could have another group of monsters who are hearing the fighting join the fight, and now it becomes a 3-way fight, yeah? Or maybe the party get reinforcements if it's too dangerous. Obviously don't overdo it, but if it makes sense to do so, why not, right? Maybe they're not too far from town. You know, the local patrolmen have heard their shouting, they're screaming, and have come over to help them, the same way that many adventurers do that for NPCs. Whilst they're driving down the road, they hear screams ahead and they charge in to save them. And in that way, you know, you're not fudging dice, you're just kind of developing the narrative, you're developing the story, and players can usually get behind that very, very well. The best thing I've actually seen as a DM is an approaching sandstorm during a fight that was way too hard for them. Something that's quite similar to the Scorpion King, the battle in that, where he kind of rides towards the enemy with the sandstorm at his rear. That's just, you know, really, really cool. What do you guys think about encounter balance? Let the community know in the comment section below. Make sure to join my Discord if you'd like to get involved in my community and join our monthly events that we do on there. And join my Patreon, either as a free or paid member, if you'd like to get access to charts, tables, or other stuff that you can use to make your campaigns better. I'll see you guys next time on Loki's Lair. Till then.